All right. I want to show you a quick animation just to kind of start us off in this video. All right. So first and foremost, sometimes when we are creating animations, and let's see if I've got an example here. Sometimes when we're creating animations, we want some kind of movement where in our animation we've got a shape that's moving back and forth. So a pendulum would be a really good example of this. So here we've got this little yarn ball here, and we see that it's swinging back and forth, back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. When it gets to this side, it moves back. When it gets to the other side, it moves back. That is an example of a pendulum here. You can see a lot of different examples of this when you're working with games where maybe you have, I don't know, some sort of like a creature or character that's kind of like hovering back and forth or moving back and forth or running back and forth. That is a really common example of why we would use bounded motion. Also on your projects, we can also see here an example of bounded motion here. I've got this boy on a skateboard and he's moving. And notice here that after he gets to a certain point, he moves in the opposite direction. Gets to a certain point, moves in an opposite direction. Okay? These are all examples of bounded motion. So with that said, let's go ahead and get started. We're going to dive into the sandbox. And just for the sake of looking at that example that we just saw, I'm going to call this yarn string, just because I kind of like that example. And I'm just going to call it yarn ball. There we go. And I'm just going to go ahead and make the color to be navy. I'm going to make this fill navy. I liked the example of that giant yarn ball, so I'm going to go ahead and choose that. Okay, so I've got my little yarn ball here. It's all just one color, but that's completely fine. So normally if we want things to move to the right, we would use our on step. So we know that on step allows things to just move automatically. So we can just say something like this. We do this yarn ball dot center X plus equals, let's say a number small like 2. And then we'd also make sure that the yarn ball, the yarn string is always stuck to the ball. So we'd say something like yarn string dot, let's see, x2, because it's the x coordinate of the second point. We want to make sure that that's always the same as the center x of the yarn ball. So let's run this. And if we run this here, we're going to see that now the yarn string and the yarn ball are always together. Okay. But notice, unfortunately, that our yarn ball, it just keeps moving off the screen. It doesn't ever stop. We want it to stay within the bounds of the canvas, hence why we call it bounded motion. So I'm going to show you a few tricks. First off, I'm going to go ahead and give my yarn ball a new property. We've heard about different shape properties like fill or opacity, or for a circle, we could say even radius. Those are all shape properties. But we can also create our own shape properties. In this case, I'm going to call it x speed. It's going to represent the speed of my yarn ball in the x direction. Now, this is going to be really helpful because this is going to keep track of whether or not this speed is positive, that means moving to the right, or negative, that means moving to the left. So here's an example. I'm going to say yarn ball.x speed is equal to, let's say, 5. Now, instead of having the yarn ball increase the center x by 2, we're going to actually have the center x increase by the ball's speed here. And that's going to become important in a moment because, again, this is going to keep track of whether or not our speed is moving in the positive direction or the negative direction, left or right. All right, so let's run this. And we're going to see it still works pretty similarly. Okay, now what we need here is we need an if statement that's going to look a little bit like this. If the yarn ball dot right, so if the right side is greater than or equal to 400, which means basically it just means that our yarn ball is touching this right side. If it's greater than or equal to 400, what we want to do is we want to go ahead and change the x speed of the yarn ball to, instead of being positive, we want it to be negative. Watch what happens here. Run. Boom. And now it hits the other side, and then it moves in the opposite direction. You can imagine that we can do something really similar for the left side. So if the yarn ball dot left is less than or equal to 0, which means it's gone past these limits of the canvas, the x value is too far off screen, then we want the x speed to go back to being positive so that it moves to the right. So let's go ahead and run this. Let's see what that looks like. All right, we've got our ball. Boom, it hits that side. Boom, it hits that side. Boom, it hits that side. So it's exactly here an example of bounded motion, where we've got one shape, and after a certain point, it moves back. We could also adjust these numbers a little bit. Let's say you don't want the shape to go all the way to the end of the canvas. You could also change it and adjust the numbers. So now when the right value, there we go. There we go. When the right side is at 300, now it moves back. When the left side is at 100, it moves in the opposite direction. So now here we can see that the bounded movement has a much tighter range here, okay? So this is a really basic example of how you make sure you can have a shape that moves back and forth instead of just, for instance, moving off the screen and coming back, which was called a wraparound. Please let me know if you have any questions. I hope this video helps.